The best books of 2023, here we go. What is up, book babes? I'm here to give you my top 10 with maybe a little bonus, so top 11. I have had such an incredible reading year. I reached my Goodreads goal, which was to read 50 books and surpassed it, reading as of now 74, about to be 75, probably as soon as I finish this video. Every year I look forward to watching best of 2023 and worst of 2023 and actually making it as well. So today you are getting the best of 2023, and look out for the most disappointing books I've read in 2023. I'm sure that list is going to be a little bit spicy. Now, I want to start off with talking about A Dowry of Blood. This book was such a surprise to me. I had no idea it would make it into the top list of this wrap up. It was so gorgeous. Like, the writing was just, how is this book so beautiful, but also what in the Alabama did I just read? No offense to those in actual Alabama. Now, if you don't know what I mean, we'll get there. This book is actually a retelling of Dracula's brides. So in the original, Dracula has 3 brides that he seduces, he makes them immortal, he keeps them forever. But in this book, we actually focus on the first bride of Dracula, and she writes this story in a journal format, or like a confession letter, really. And basically, it shows us that Dracula is incredibly abusive and traps all of his wives and slowly unravels what he did that led to his eventual murder. Basically, they ended up killing him. The main character, Constanza, is his very first wife, or supposedly his first wife, and this book was so gorgeous. The author, S.T. Gibson, just writes such a gorgeous story. I've never wanted to annotate a book more in my life. Of course, I didn't annotate this one because I read my library copy. My other books are still in storage. I'm still trying to move into my new home, but it makes me want to reread this book. It was just so beautiful. It is a very short book, so you can fly through it. I cannot stress enough how gorgeous the writing was in this book. The only thing that threw me off throughout this book, and my buddy Reed as well, is the fact that the characters end up calling each other siblings. So they are all married and they are all together romantically, but there are instances where Dracula refers to each and every one of them as siblings. So he'll tell Constanza, oh, your sister Magdalena, or your brother Alexei, and it's just so weird. It was so uncomfortable to see this messed up family dynamic, and really shows you what they actually learned from him, what he actually placed within them, and really that doesn't go away even after they move away from him. And so that's the only part that I was like, I get what we're doing here, kind of like a sister wives thing, if you've ever seen that show. But also, they were very clear in Sister Wives that they don't actually get together in that sense. So the fact that they did in this book was just so cringe. But that still didn't take away from how gorgeous the story was. The writing was just really beautiful, and I really enjoyed this buddy read. So shout out to my friend Chelsea for reading this book with me. Now, I cannot make this video without mentioning Fourth Wing. Okay, hear me out. I know there are 2 different camps for Fourth Wing, but I am definitely team love it. Amazing. Is it a literary masterpiece? No. Is it super different and new than other fantasies we've seen? Also no. But is it a wild ride and just so good? And did I binge it? And did it make me feel? Yes. This book was so good. So good that I ended up owning like 4 different editions of this book. I need to stop. I have a problem. I really adored this book. I also recommended this book to a few people that have never really read fantasy before and were just starting off. This is still considered high fantasy because you have words that you can't pronounce, you have different creatures, you have powers, you have a new world, you have different rules in this world as well. But I think it is a great like all-in-one. It really encompasses what fantasy was in the early 2000s, is today. There's just a lot going on there, and I just love the characters so much. It was very adventurous, really focuses on this girl that's going through this war college trying to survive, but she has a chronic illness, and she also has a lot of enemies because her mother killed an entire rebellion. So the founding fathers of this rebellion, all the parents, and the only thing left from that rebellion are the children left behind. And these kids are forced into this war college as well. And so obviously, if the daughter of this general that murdered all these parents, obviously they're all out to get her as well, because yes, you can actually kill other cadets while being in this war college. So she's out here trying to venture through, and of course course, the main rebellion kid, his father is the one who started this rebellion, ends up falling in love with her. So there's a lot of enemies to lovers here as well. There's a lot of secrets and scandals and magic and dragons. So of course I have to mention it here. It also became wildly popular over on almost any platform, BookTok, Bookstagram, BookTube. It became a wildly popular book that even the sequel had its own midnight release party that I attended. It was a blast. I've just never seen hype like this around a book in a really long time. The last time I think I saw this type of book hype was probably with Twilight, Harry Potter, Hunger Games maybe. I've never attended a midnight release party for a book before. It's been so fun being a part of a community that like buzzes all together, and we've just enjoyed it so much. And I just love that the main interest in this book, he is so intelligent, he is so dimensional, he has so many secrets, he's so emotionally mature. There are so many great things about Xaden, who's technically only 20 or 21 in this book. He's so smart. I just love that character so much, and I love that he's actually a BIPOC character and that the author really stands by that. It's just been really refreshing to see, also for young men that don't always see themselves as a main character, because we typically have non-BIPOC characters as our main characters. That was just a little extra touch that I appreciated. This was the year, y'all. This was the year that I found basically an auto-buy author, and that is Rebecca Ross. So I have to talk about A Fire Endless. Now this is so funny because A Fire Endless is actually book 2. Book 1 is A River Enchanted, but A Fire Endless was stunning. It was so moving. It was so unique, different. I have no idea how Rebecca Ross had this idea come to her, how she made that storyline. It was so gorgeous. I just wanted to read it again, okay? The writing was spectacular, so lyrical. Definitely have magic realism in this book as well. It takes from Scottish lore. It was just such a beautiful book. I adored every single page, just reading it, going through it. I love that I have the UK edition in hardcover because they just don't make those anymore. I am looking for that first book, but that's a whole other thing. And there are only 2 books in the series. I did not think I would love the second book as much, and that it would be 5 stars, and that I would want to reread it, and that it would make me love her writing even more. It was just so stunning. I loved all the characters so much more in book 2. I felt so connected to them. I cannot talk about this book enough. That's why it had to be on this list. Now, if you go into this series, A River Enchanted is very slow. Very slow. This is why I was really surprised that I liked book 2, but the ending of A River Enchanted was just too good that I had to read book 2. And so I really recommend you try book 1 with an audiobook to really get through it, because it took me a while. I was like, come on, I love her writing. I cannot complain about her writing at all. It was just the pacing that I really struggled with. But book 2 was just, it just blew me out of the water. It was so good. We focus on different family dynamics in that island that are just so intertwined. It makes the story so beautiful, and you really wonder, how is this gonna be solved? Because if we know anything, is that family and dynamics of family can be really messy, especially when you throw in more complicated things like betrayals and secrets and all of that stuff. It just becomes so difficult to really unravel everything and solve it. And that's really what happens in both of these books. We're trying to figure out, as a reader, how are we gonna solve this? And so it's just amazing how this author ended up tying everything together, ended up healing things, ended up changing things. I was just so surprised, and I highly recommend it. I'm so happy I read this, and I hope to own a special editions of these 2 books because I adore them so much. Number 4. Okay, I am really surprised by this one as well because I adored Immortal Longings. Okay, this is a book I've mentioned a few times on this channel because marketing really didn't do it many favors. It has really poor ratings on Goodreads, but if you really look at the reviews, it's because the reader came with their own story in mind, their own expectations, and of course it was a completely different story, because if everyone writes their own story in their head and comes in and it's a whole other story, it's gonna get a lower rating than it deserves. I don't think it deserves all those 1 stars, but you have to read it and you have to let me know what you think. Immortal Longings is just such a fast-paced, plot twist filled sci-fi fantasy radical story. It is so good. It is actually Chloe Gong's debut adult fantasy book, and it was a very different book for me. I barely got into adult fantasy this year, and I'm so happy I did because I've loved that genre and that age category. But this book blew my mind. I was racing through it. I was really confused at first because the writing just seems so technical and so straight and so cookie cutter, like in the box, I guess. And then I realized that it's because the characters are so detached and emotionally distanced, and that changes throughout the book because Chloe Gong really took inspiration from Mark Antony and Cleopatra and the obsession these real life people had with each other, and she made this love story, maybe not a love story, either way it was so good, and I was like screaming throughout the whole book. I was really surprised that more people didn't talk about it over on Bookstagram or booktube, wherever it is that you get your book content, because it was just so good. I mean, the plot twist throughout the whole book, the action sequence, it really takes place in a city that you can picture. It reminded me a little bit of the world building in Six of Crows when we talk about the barrel and Ketterdam. It really surprised me that I could really see this city. So Saint-Air is supposed to be the city that is so crowded, overpopulated, can relate because there are so many cities around me or that I've lived in that are exactly that way. It's always super bright. There's always insane crime. People are overcrowded in these tiny apartments, but there is a tournament every year, and if you win, if you're able to kill all 87 contestants and you're the only one standing out of 88, you get all the riches in the world given to you by the king, or technically dictator. Honestly, he's hands down a dictator, and you get to live your life just as you want it because there's no other way to really survive in Saint-Air without crime or winning this tournament. But instead we have this forgotten fugitive princess, because Saint-Air used to be two different cities. You had San, you had Air, and her father used to rule, I believe, Air. It's been a minute, okay? But she ended up killing her entire family. So of course she's on the hunt. No one knows where this princess is hiding, and now she secretly joined this tournament because it's the only time anyone is able to see the king and shake his hand and take the riches, and of course she's trying to kill him. Okay, so we have this character, but we also have other characters that are trying to win this as well and save their loved ones. So you're in for a ride. There is so much adventure, action, tragedy, and I'm telling you, so many plot twists. I cannot wait for book 2. I am screaming for book 2, y'all. I want book 2 and I want it now. So last year I actually ended up awarding the best book ever to a memoir, which I was really surprised by because memoirs are really a new thing for me. I'm not really into celebrities, meaning I don't really follow them, know all about them. I don't have anyone that I idolize or anything like that. So celebrity memoirs I thought were not my thing until more celebrities started coming out and sharing their actual story. So for example, when Jeanette McCurdy came out and talked about the relationship with her mom, when Trejo, who I awarded the best book of 2022 to, he actually came out to talk about his faith and about his addiction. That book was so incredibly moving. So of course, when I heard that Paris Hilton was actually going to come out and talk about the juvenile facility she was in and all the abuse she endured and the way she's advocating in Congress and out in the world and protesting and making all of these things to really change the system, it really got me curious. So I picked up the book, and y'all, I sobbed throughout this entire book. So I want to make a more in-depth review, and I definitely will, but I have to include it in this list, and I think it might actually be my top favorite book of the year. So another memoir, probably because of just how moving, how vulnerable, how awful the things were in there. Honestly, it's like, yes, it was an incredible book in the sense of her vulnerability and the way she was storytelling, but it was awful, okay? The events are really heavy. It's a really dark and heavy book. As someone who loves working with students and has a huge heart for our youth, hearing what young Paris went through, even though I know she's okay now, was just very difficult for me to get through. I'm surprised I got through the book because I kid you not, I was just sobbing throughout the entire thing. I had to take breaks. She even encourages you in the book to take breaks because I just couldn't believe everything that she actually went through in this book. It sounded like a horror film. It sounded like every time she talked about her escape routes, because she tried to escape so many times, it sounded like a thriller horror movie. And you know, when you watch those, you have like that awful feeling in your stomach that you're like, like, I hope you get out, go, run. And then when they get grabbed at the end, it's just the worst sinking feeling, except this was real life. And so this memoir was actually amazing. I don't recommend it to everyone though, because of just how heavy it is. So if you thought Jeanette McCurdy's book was heavy because she is very open about all the things that she goes through with her mom, this I think is heavier, okay? So if you couldn't even handle that, or if that was already too much for you, please stay clear of this book. Maybe just read the highlights or watch her interviews about them. You'll get the gist of what she went through and what she's advocating for. I admire this book so much. I admire the way she came out and said this story, because she doesn't owe us, she doesn't owe the world anything, but the world definitely owes her an apology for everything they also put her through and all the labels they put on her. And I just admire how she even decided to write this book. She wrote it with so much empathy for the people around her, and also with so much justice for the people that chose to be abusive toward youth. So, oh my gosh, amazing book, okay? I adore it so much. Let me know if you read it, and if you do, take care of yourself, be careful, and just prepare to sob throughout the whole thing. That was a little bit of a heavy note, but I just want to say thank you again for watching. And if you are enjoying this and you're not yet subscribed, it would mean so much. I think more than half of you watching are actually unsubscribed, and it honestly helps out the channel so much when you subscribe. It is absolutely free for you, but it helps all content creators so much. Thank you so much if you decide to subscribe, and thanks so much for hanging out and watching. Moving on. I think this was the year I found my most favorite audiobook of all time, and that is Masters of Death. Oh my gosh, this book is so chaotic. If you've ever seen the show Supernatural, you know, with Sam and Dean and all the different types of creatures and lore that they pack into that show, while also being funny and sarcastic and wholesome, you're gonna love Masters of Death. Masters of Death has like 7 or 9 characters. They're all different supernatural characters as well. You have a witch, you have a vampire, you have a ghost, you have death itself, and it is such a chaos. I'm like, how does the author live in her head, and how was she able to put this on paper? Because what she managed to do in this book was nothing short of incredible. Her storytelling in this book was insanely impressive. I am just in awe of so many authors I read this year, because the way they were able to actually manage unraveling and storytelling and connecting all of the things is just mind-blowing. What makes this audiobook so impressive, it's actually narrated by Scott West, I believe, which I'm just gonna be looking out for him and for any books that he's reading, because he was phenomenal. This book, like I said, has many characters, and it also has a ton of dialogue. So there are literal pages where it doesn't really tell you who's talking to who, you just kind of have to follow along. You really do get to know the characters, so you know who's talking. As an audiobook narrator, that means he had to make 7 to 9 unique voices, and as a reader, I had to be able to distinguish every single one. I cannot praise him enough. It was amazing. I had so much fun. If sarcasm is your thing, you're gonna love this so much. It gets a little confusing. There's like, I think around the 60% mark, I'm like, come on, just out with it already. What is the game? What are we talking about? I was getting a little bit frustrated, but just when the author was about to lose me, she just, bam, delivered. It was awesome. Okay, it was such an epic story, and the ending really revealed what the theme was, what the author is trying to tell you, and I wanted to reread it ASAP. Can you see a pattern here? Can you see how my top books are books I want to reread, but so many books, so little time? How can I reread them? I can't, but I want to. And so that's why it's on this list. I would 100% read Masters of Death again, but I highly, highly recommend you pick up this audiobook and take that wild ride with that incredible narrator. Moving on into some sci-fi, I want to highlight Red Rising. When I read this book, I was super shocked by just how much I enjoyed it, how adventurous it was. I did not expect that at all, and I honestly loved Darrow, our MC. When I think about this book, I think about Hunger Games, but make it adult. I was so surprised it was YA. Darrow is a more complex character for sure, and I think that's what makes this book more adultish to me. This world takes place basically like in the future. It is definitely sci-fi, but it is a sci-fi book that I recommend to non-usual sci-fi readers. So if you've ever been curious about sci-fi or you want to try it a little bit, I recommend this book, okay? It is definitely more high sci-fi. You have names that are a little bit strange. You have different groups of people. You have Red, reds and pinks and blues, and I've definitely featured it a lot on this channel because it's just so adventurous, it's so good, and it has a lot of different secrets and plot twists and a lot to say about equality and rewriting history and the unbalance of power with government and the people and slavery, just all the things. It has so much going on. It's paced really well, so you're not completely overwhelmed, and it's just not an info dump right away. I feel like sometimes a lot of people are intimidated by sci-fi because it's gonna get super sciencey. It's gonna throw a lot of words at you, and I've definitely seen books like that where it just info dumps so hard on you that you don't even know. You're like, are you making this complicated for absolutely no reason? And fortunately, Red Rising is not written that way. It is very easy to understand, to read, to get through, but it is still complex and weaves a great story. In this world, we have people living in different parts of the galaxy. Earth doesn't really exist so much anymore, and we had to somehow survive out there in space. And so the people of Mars work underground. They're the reason we are moving towards a brighter future. It's because of their work, aka their slavery. They have no other life. They can't really make it out. It reminds me a lot of District 12 from the Hunger Games. They're just stuck there until Darrow finds out that is absolutely not true. And so that's where the story really begins. I was really surprised that we lose characters that we loved right away, right at the beginning of the book. I don't know how Pierce Brown, the author, ended up doing that to me, that I ended up loving so many characters in the beginning and they were just gone right away. I think this is a good intro to trying a sci-fi book. Also recommend the audiobook in that one because it can get a little bit Lord of the Flies, but the ending and everything else that happens, top tier. Okay, y'all, I just finished this book and I have a lot of mixed thoughts, but I think I'm pretty set in how I feel about it and what I think about it and why it is featured in this video. And that is House of Spirits by Isabel Allende. I ended up buddy reading this book and I'm so glad I did because it is so ridiculously heavy. This is one of the most depressing books I've read in my entire life. And it's absolute fiction, but yet it is not, because these historical events did happen. Family dynamics like this do exist. These awful political things that happened in real life, okay? And so that's what makes this book very, very difficult. So I was really shocked that, one, the book isn't very long. It's 450 pages, and for someone who reads fantasy, you know that's not much. I think the biggest book I read this year was 800, and my average page read was in the 500s. It wasn't actually technically long, but because it was very heavy information and you have to be engaged the whole time to understand the way the events are unfolding, it was heavy. I contemplated a few times if I would even finish this book because it was just a lot. And honestly, our MC, the main character, he's horrible. I was so bummed out that we were stuck with him for the entire book because yikes, everything he did was just awful, but so true and so real for this time. So this book basically takes place in Chile, and this is post-colonial for sure. And so there are a lot of things that happen because you go through 3-4 generations of people from this family to really understand how the final member of this family, we have to understand why she's in that place. And so to understand why she's in that place, we have to go back. And so it's amazing how this author managed to make me feel each generation's length. Like, wow, I really do feel like it's been 30 years, 50 years without making this book unnecessarily long. House of Spirits is magic realism, but it's a very different type of magic realism that I'm used to. There are subcategories for them, but Allende is famously known for her take on magic realism and how she writes it. And honestly, I think that's why this book made it on this list. It is so dark because it's so real, and the way she managed that storytelling is what made this book go on this list. When I finished that book and when I read that last line, I wanted to weep from how amazing and how beautiful she made this story. And I just remember closing the book and thinking, now I know why this is a classic. So I highly recommend this book. Proceed with caution. I'm definitely happy I read a quick, easy fantasy book right after. I devoured it in 2 days because I needed a palate cleanser so bad. This book is going to really show you and highlight what was going on in Chile. She does an amazing job with the political fiction. She sets up these new characters, but with very very, very real stories. There's definitely a lot that happens in this book to the characters. Fortunately, she is not graphic, which I appreciate. I don't think you have to be graphic in order to impact your audience, in order to really get your point across. So she is not graphic, and all the awful things and the atrocities that happen to the women in this book are the atrocities that the men end up doing in this book. But there are definitely moments in this book where it is graphic enough that you understand what's happening and how awful it is. I'm going on and on about this book, but I love it, okay? This is what we're here for. This is what the video is for. I just have to say, the way she even talks about feelings, like her sentence structure on why someone is sad and what way are they sad, it just impacted me so much. Good book, but oof, had to definitely brush that book off and self-soothe a little bit after, because it was just so much. Maybe it impacted me even more because I am Latina. I've also heard my own grandparents tell me stories very similar to this. It just maybe hit home. It was maybe a little too close that I could see it, I could understand it. I know that these things exist, so maybe that's why the book also hit harder. Isabel Allende is such an incredible storyteller. I highly recommend. One more super tragic book, and then I promise I will mention this other bonus book, which is basically number 11, as a lighthearted finish, because I could not finish in this sad sense. If you really look at all these books, man, they all made me cry, okay? They all made me feel something. I was either screaming or crying, nothing in between. And like we say here, make us cry, you most likely get 5 stars. I have to talk about Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I read this book right at the beginning of 2023. Oh my gosh, it took me a little bit of time to get into. It feels like a dense book because of the timeline. She goes kind of like back and forth, and it's kind of chaotic and crazy, but also great storytelling. I think though, my favorite thing about this book and why it impacted me so much is that she really managed to show you what happens as you get older, how you lose friends, and that's something that I think every 20-something-year-old going into their 30s can really relate to. You start realizing that not everyone's going to stay with you forever, and if you're lucky to have someone that stays with you forever, to really cherish them, to forgive them, to grow with them, to communicate with them, because it really teaches you about friendships and different dynamics in this book. I finished it at like 2 a.m. by myself. I was like, what do I do with myself at this point? And I was just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Just crying. You really focus on these 3 best friends that end up going into video game making together. It is such a love letter to video games, and I was fortunate enough to grow up with a dad that loved video games so much and really introduced me to every single old school video game and how to play them, and we just evolved with the video gaming space as well. And so reading about all these real life video games was just so nostalgic. But these other characters that go through life, I mean, it really just shows you that life happens and people change, and if you don't talk about the things that are hurting you with the people you love, you can really lose them, and you can lose a lot of time together, make a lot of hurt. A lot of things can go wrong really fast if you don't communicate, process those emotions, forgive each other. So this is something I definitely recommend for people in their mid-20s going into their 30s, and definitely 30s going into your 40s, because you journey with these characters from their early 20s all the way to like 37 or 38. So that's a lot. Those 2 seasons are just so different. She just did a great job of making us feel how we aged with them. And I was able to talk about this book with 2 other friends, and both of these friends are older than me. And so I think when I was explaining to them how it impacted me and how I think it is for people in that age range and why, they both ended up agreeing and seeing what I meant. And I think that that tells you how great of a story this was, because it really is trying to showcase something to you or even warn you before you get to that point in life. And so I don't know, I think I hugged my friends a little extra that day in my mind. It brought a lot of peace, a lot of wisdom into my life. Highly recommend Tomorrow, Tomorrow, Tomorrow if you want to cry. But it's so good. To absolutely not end in a quarter life crisis type of book, I'm gonna highlight real quick Divine Rival. So this is also Rebecca Ross. She has been mentioned twice in this video, 2 different books. I briefly had to mention Divine Rivals because it was such a sweet love story, okay? I was gushing. I have not seen Close Proximity done this well, gushy, in so long. I loved Iris and Roman so much. I loved their banter, their tension, and the magic in here was so so enchanting and different and unique. It's just tiny, okay? This book isn't super fantastical. So even though there is a war between gods going on, you don't really see much about the gods. Even though there is a little bit of magic that exists in here, it's done in such a clever and cute way that it doesn't really read like super high fantasy, but it is a romantic fantasy book. And I feel like I had to mention this book because I am seriously so excited for Ruthless Vows, which is the second book. And if I'm this excited about the sequel, it probably means that Divine Rivals was really like a top favorite book. That ending should not have happened, Miss Rebecca Ross, without the second book being out already, okay? I was left screaming, wondering what was gonna happen. So there you have it, book babes. Those were my favorite books of 2023. I am still reading, but I had to get, of course, this book out to you before the end of the year. So happy holidays, you guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with me here. I hope you have an amazing holiday. I hope you're surrounded by loved ones. I hope you get to embrace them or embrace yourself if that's something that you really need. Enjoy a good book today. Pick up one of these recs. Thank you so much for spending time with me, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!